Hi, my name is Austin Chadwick, and you're going to be listening to a segment of Respectful Disagreement. And we'll talk a little bit about what that means to us and why we want to do such a thing. But before we get into a Respectful Disagreement on a kind of estimates, no estimates topic, we'll share a little bit about us, the people disagreeing respectfully. Yeah, Peter, do you mind sharing a little bit about who you are?
Yeah, my name is Peter Kretzmann. I am a longtime IT person who started out in the ranks as a developer, moved up over the years, the decades since then, and have basically been in every arena of IT that you can probably think of at some point. So yeah, lots and lots of things to say on this topic and many others, and hopefully this will be the start of a series of various discussions.
Nice, nice. Yeah, and, my name is Austin Chadwick, and been in the software IT world for about 15 years. And yeah, I've worn a ton of different hats from traditional IT business analysts, QA, done Scrum mastering, reliability engineer, developer, tester. And then of late been more into the mod programming thing. And yeah, and I've experienced estimates and no estimates world. And so it'd be fun to jump into this topic. And before we jump into the topic, we wanted to talk a bit about some ground rules and what they mean to us and kind of why we're doing this kind of respectful disagreement thing. And so we made some graphics here. And Peter, if you want to share what these mean to you and why we're pointing them out.
Yeah, we actually stole the graphics, just to be just to be clear. We didn't actually construct these. At least the one on the right, I'm not sure where exactly the one on the left came from, but the one on the right I think comes from Paul Graham, who's obviously a well-known VC person. And I feel really strongly about kind of both of these things, where when we have a discourse on a controversial topic, that it's really important to understand what contributes to a good discussion and what doesn't. And this discourse pyramid is one that I find really useful in pointing out things that aren't helpful and things that are more helpful. And the higher you get in the pyramid, the more meaningful it is to have a discussion. If you're at the bottom of the period, talking name calling and whatever, that's not helpful. And so that's the part that I will probably refer back to. I don't see it being an issue here, but it certainly has been an issue in online discussions, shall we say. So that's kind of where this came from.
Yeah, and for me too. I mean, I'm really probably passionate more about this than any topic we'll discuss, which is just yeah. And so radical candor that's inspired from the book and other things. So we'll put links in the notes where these things come from. But yeah, so I really love the idea of really caring about people, being really kind, considerate, respectful. But also, it feels really, in my experience, really good for relationships and business to share honestly, right? And so to be in that trust and able to share ideas and change and maybe consider what they're thinking. Where if I'm holding back and not being another term in the industry, psychologically safe, there may be things that we're not helping each other learn from each other or helping the product and those kind of things. And so yeah, established on a firm foundation of being kind and respectful. Yeah, to share honestly and be like, oh, here's what I really think about this. What do you think? And so the primary aim is not to necessarily win at all costs or anything like that. It's to honestly share and disagree if there's disagreement there, and then learn from each other in the process. And I've had so many amazing experiences in that kind of quadrant of radical candor and this top part of the discourse pyramid that I'd love to see more of it. And that's our target for today on no estimates.
Yeah, and I'd like to kind of bring everybody participating in this dialogue into this idea. And I've been thrilled to have discussions with Austin on these topics, and I'm looking forward to having this discussion today.
Yeah, awesome. Right on. So now we'll get into maybe more the topic at hand to respectfully disagree about. So I'll be the one making the assertion today. And basically, the assertion is, at least in some contexts, in the software or IT world, there's no need for software time estimates or relative sizing. We'll talk in a little bit here what we mean by those things. You can, so to speak, just prioritize on value. And that sounds very sloganistic or just something you can just say. But I think what I'll be sharing today has to do with being most of my career doing lots of time estimates and relative sizing, and then recently being in a place where we don't do that and how it's worked out. And feasible means that we could have a successful product, successful relationships internally between the different departments that work on the product and with the customers while doing so. But first let's define some terms.
Just before you move on, I just wanted to say the no estimates discussion has been a very long running one, shall we say, and it's key to make sure that we're clear. This is just one aspect of it. And we've decided to try to narrow it down to this one aspect. There are many related aspects. There are other things that we won't be getting into today. We'll probably touch upon a few other of the main things, but there's lots and lots more to say. And we've decided to try to see if we can just narrow it down, slice it, so to speak, and have a good discussion just on that one aspect.
For sure. Yeah, and that's a good point too. And then there is a lot of advocates on either side, and at least for the no estimate side. I am not the Lorax. I do not speak for the trees. So I'm basically just speaking from my experiences and limited context. And so, that's what I'll be bringing today. And that's good to bring that up. So getting into definitions, Peter, do you want to take some of these? What do you mean by time? What do we mean, or you mean by time estimates and relative sizing?
Well, it's interesting because the assertion comes, obviously, as you said, the assertion is yours in this particular case. And, just like so much in this presentation, it isn't exactly how I would necessarily have phrased it. And so I guess I would push it back a little bit on you. I'll take a little bit of a stab in saying that time estimates to me is often a red herring, because it's pretty well established in psychological studies, et cetera, that everybody's pretty bad at estimating specific units of time. And so I am not, just to be clear, I am not a big proponent of estimating the time for things. And we'll talk about where there are edges of that and where you sort of have to eventually do it, because you do eventually have to do it. But that's the first thing I would say. Much different from a relative sizing thing, which is largely geared towards right sizing capacity of what the team can actually come up with, what the team can deliver. And that to me is a really key role of estimating in general and why it's so important. As for value, I'm interested in hearing what you have to say about value. I'm going to have a lot to say about value, because the definition of that is really pretty key to how you define, how you stated the assertion. And the only other thing I'll say, and I'll hand it back to you just in a second, Austin, is you started out the assertion within some contexts.
Yes.
And I grant you that with almost any words that might follow that. That's great, right? And so, yes, it isn't just about establishing whether something can work in some context. I will grant that all day long. Stipulated, right?
Yeah.
Given. Because the deal here, as we talk about what works best in general terms, in industry terms, in development terms for the software industry, what works best as a recommendation to make, not just, well, this can work in some contexts. I mean, some contexts, if I had a big ranch, I don't, but I'd let my 9-year-old son drive around the ranch maybe in a Jeep, right? That doesn't mean that, that's a good context for saying, oh, 9-year-olds are great at driving. What's the problem? And so that's the kind of thing that I want to make sure that we focus on. That yes, some context, but what's the overall thrust?
No, I think that's fair. We can, I think my assertion will start with some context, and then we can start talking about more than some, right, and see if there's any validity there. Yeah, and so I think that's a great point, a good distinction for sure, and one I like to make often as well is. When I'm making a universal claim versus a, hey, this worked for me, but it maybe won't work for you kind of claim, right? And so, that's a good distinction. And so I guess on time estimates, I have no change to what you said there, relative sizing. Yeah, I mean, you can go look up, story points or t-shirt sizing. There's a lot of work on this in the Agile community. I've done years of at other places, story point, poker, and those kind of things. So, and then value and prioritizing value. Actually, I'll save that for my my case, so to speak, or my sharing segment here. which I guess I'll jump into.
Yeah, it's key. It's absolutely
Yes.
key, as we're going to talk about.
Yeah, for sure. I guess what I can share is years of software development in a context where some ways we've said it is we've done a lean value stream map of things that provide value to the product and to our people. And estimates were identified as something that was not value adding. So we eliminated it, and we tried that, and been trying that. And for me personally, it was like, oh, let me try that. What's a value stream map look like without that? And things went very well often. So this is a little bit of the how, many examples. So I'll give a couple examples of things we've done. But the kind of overall flow is, what's it look like without estimates? So, business or customers ask for a new feature, or it could be a new product. I've seen that happen as well. And then they're like, okay, and then they start talking about the things they want out of the new feature or new product. And then, we start either through diagramming or writing it down or on a whiteboard. We start identifying the different parts, and then we discuss and find out, depending on the situation, what's most valuable to them, if it's a customer or internal stakeholder, or the more ideal is like what's going to be the most profitable for the company, right? And then through discussion on those items with them, kind of put next to each other in the different pieces, they'll be like, all right, we talked about it, and let's say there's 26 pieces, of A through Z. We've put D at the top, and so these teams that I've been on already have an existing budget, so to speak, for the team to support or make a product, and we are going to keep working on features, kind of continuously, kind of more of a program instead of a project mindset. And so we start working on D, and D itself might be pretty big. And then we break down D into D1, D2, D3, or whatever. And then what we do is, and we say, okay, here's the first usable piece of D. Here's D1. And then we show that, and we deliver it, and then we get feedback, and then we do D2. And then they'll be like, okay, I think D's done. All right, what's next after that? And so we kind of rinse and repeat this process. And maybe they thought before that B was the most valuable or most profitable thing, but the market has changed, the analytics have changed, and that kind of stuff. And now it's F. We're going to go do F instead. And then we just kind of rinse and repeat through that process. And I've seen this happen in tense situations. I've seen it happen in relaxed situations in regards to market and need to deliver. And in all cases, it's worked out really, really well. There's been cases where, they want A through Z, and we deliver, D, E, F, and then they're like, oh, we don't need it anymore. And then they're done. They thought they needed all this before, but then after they release a few, the customers are happy with this, and then they want to move on to a completely different alphabet or something like that. So I'm leaving some things vague. So I'll use some visual aids to help with that a little bit. So when breaking up a feature, the goal is to split it vertically, as you can kind of see in this picture here, where, concrete example would be like, hey, we need a new page that renames a domain concept. Or it could be as big as, hey, we need this thing to be on the cloud. But in either case, we say like, okay, what's one slice we can do that we can deliver to get feedback on? And that delivery could either be to the production market, it could be to real beta user customers, or less ideally to just internal people. We deliver that and get feedback, and then be like, okay, we did A, let's do B, let's do C, and you just keep going slice through each slice at a time, as opposed to being like, okay, we're going to do the entire database schema for all A through Z before we do anything that a user could use, right? So there's a handful of different ways that could be not done vertically, but the whole idea is to do the UI, the middle, the database, all the different components, whatever it's needed to deliver value. And then this next slide talks about kind of how it looks and how it often works in my experience is you deliver, you get feedback, you keep delivering increments, you get feedback. And sometimes things have a kind of irreducible complexity to them. And so they'll be feature flagged. So either it will be feature flagged in a way where it's not delivered to production, or it's delivered to production, but it's turned off. And so these are ways to deliver continuously and be getting feedback from a limited number of users, but have it turned off for others until it's decided, this is ready to go to everybody, kind of thing. And so that's kind of if you can see the diagram, kind of the yellow part where it might be a minimum viable product or minimum viable feature. There might be several iterations that don't go to everybody, so to speak. And then there's that tricky word value. And so I will be first to say I'm not an expert on this topic, but I've seen it go well with getting feedback. So whether that's sometimes it's real obvious what of A through Z is the most valuable. I've seen cases where it's like half our we have this many sales that aren't going through until they have feature A, and we have customers saying that once you have A, we will purchase. And then the other features that are up that we might work on are like nobody's saying that. And so it makes it more obvious to make a decision. But other types of value might be analytics. Usage is a user investing their time into your product to use something. That's telling you something that they, and then how they use it in the analytics tools tell you quite a bit. Surveys, social media, seeing people post about the products, gathering feedback. So this is not an area I'm an expert in, but I work with people often who are really good at this kind of thing and gathering the feedback and figuring out what's likely to lead to most sales or most customer happiness. Or sometimes it's an internal thing where, wow, we're spending money paying people to manually do this thing. So if we could automate it through software, those people won't have to do that thing anymore, and it'll save money. And that'll save more money than, I don't know, another feature which just isn't, nice to have or whatever. And so those are the different ways of measuring value. And the next slide kind of points out kind of the high level view of it is, whereas instead of focusing on internal things like estimates or output of lines of code or how many requirements are satisfied, it's more like, hey, we implemented a thing, we released it to the market. What was the outcome on those metrics or feedback earlier? And then we're looking for this kind of black swan scenario where, hey, we run an experiment and they love it and sales goes through the roof. Let's do more of that. Or, sometimes it's not always as obvious as graph has, but it's more those kind of decisions and focusing on those kind of business outcomes as opposed to internal things like so. And I will now turn it over to Peter to share his thoughts or questions.
Go back if you would, please.
Sure.
Before we get into counter argument, I just have a couple of clarifying questions.
Yep.
And I know you touched on it, but I'm just going to ask again, who determines value and how do they determine value of a particular item?
Yeah, it's a great question. So in my limited experience, I'll go back to the slide. That's taken a little bit to tick back. But it's typically business metrics. So it's things like sales or direct feedback from important customers. I've also seen feedback in the form of like, oh, wow, are customers posting about the product on social media, kind of things. And I think the tough part for this one's hard to speak generically. Because it probably depends on what matters most to your business. But for the cases I've been involved in, it's been like sales and feedback from important customers, or in some cases, customers who sell to other customers, so they have a lot of influence, kind of thing. And just what they do. Do they buy? Do they use it? Analytics, those kind of things. So yeah, that's kind of where the value fills in there.
So it's your business people primarily, obviously with lots of participation from the whole team. The whole team is part of the business too, determining the value based on some kind of assessment of how this feature will improve a particular metric or allow us to sell to a new customer base, or get some of those other benefits that you anticipate in the future. Right? Yeah. Is that a correct assessment?
Yeah, that's
okay. So in essence, how is that different from an estimate, to use a loaded word of value. Someone is out there estimating what the value is of a relatively small feature, because you took your feature and you divided it into A to Z, remember, right? And so
Yep.
they're out there figuring, well, D is the most important. Well, why? And a lot of that is based on their, their professional judgment, their research, their metrics, et cetera. But in the end, it's an opinion based on those things.
Mm-hmm.
And it's an estimate because it's not guaranteed. They could be wrong, right? I mean, they're predicting the future as in that value assessment as much as anybody is predicting the future about a delivery date in terms of, the estimates that people revile. So that's kind of my question is that if you accept estimating, which it is, I mean, I don't know, unless you're arguing against it, that's a kind of estimate. Mm-hmm. If you accept estimating when it has to do with value, why is there so much resistance to accepting other kinds of estimates, such as those related to what it will actually cost or the level of effort involved in delivery?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, so I guess I'm not against I estimates in general, so to speak. I think the kind of experiment I've been running for a few years is more the time or the relative sizing kind of stuff, as I've seen it in organizations take up a tremendous amount of time, whether big planning up front or kind of planning all the time. And that this style that I talked about maybe hasn't eliminated all estimates, but from a lean perspective has eliminated lots of time consuming things and figured out other ways to measure it. And I think at times it is an estimate, what you're talking about, like the estimate of value for doing feature D. But other times, if you've gotten into kind of the more monitoring analytics mode, it's less of a guess. It's like, oh, we've done a small piece of this feature and the feedback is like through the roof. This isn't a guess anymore. It's still a guess. I mean, nobody knows the future for certain, but it's based off of data from customers happening right now, so to speak. So yeah, there's still a bit of an estimate in there. So I don't think it's completely gone. It's just, you don't have developers spending lots of hours figuring out their time estimates or their story points or their t-shirt size for every story. That's just not even a factor in the software development process. Yeah.
And the amount of time that they spend breaking this feature into parts A to Z?
Yeah, and so I think there is time there, but that time was there before. And I think maybe I lied a bit on this slide. We don't really break it into A to Z typically. So usually, let's say if someone comes with A through Z, but once they start talking about it, like for me personally, I'll start being like, okay, obviously I see you have a lot you want to get done here, but can you start with your top few things? And so maybe we'll talk about A through D. And so we don't need to break down A, B, C, D, E through Z in great detail because we may never even work on them, right?
Okay. So, this is key though, and we're overloading the use of the letters, right? What was A this time? What was A last time? But if they come to you with a thing and you go, whoa, that's big, right? We need to break it down because that is the typical argument that we hear, right? When it comes to opposing estimates, is just break it into smaller slices, right? Okay, fair enough, because that's always a good idea. Absolutely always a good idea. So someone has to spend time. If the original thing that they ask for is so big, someone has to spend time doing that breakdown and making them suitably small, whatever that's determined to be, right? And then the question is, how much time does that take? Because I don't think that doesn't come for free. You got to spend some time talking about it, discussing, et cetera. And then the question is, how do you really gauge if it is multiple slices, which is the argument? How do you really gauge the value of this particular micro slice, right? So like, what's the value of setting aside a guest bedroom in your home? Really, well, I don't know. It's a matter of opinion, right? And what about buying a nicer chair for the bedroom? That kind of thing. And all of those can be part or a slice of improving your home. Anyway, So those are questions that I would tend to ask, encounter a little bit, and we'll get into more of that as we go further.
Sure. Yeah. And do you want me to jump to that slide, you think?
Yeah. Unless you have a reaction about, more of how do you, and I guess if you go forward one more slide, the thing that I would want to say is that I'm not opposed to any of this. All of this is sort of smart ideas, developing an MVP and delivering small increments where possible, et cetera. That is certainly a one mode of operation. And I've certainly participated in that a lot when it's been a case of a new product or a new major side of the product when it's not really clear, et cetera. And then the slide right after that was the one I was thinking of.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Go one more.
Yeah.
And so I guess that the way that this slide strikes me, and no disrespect intended by any means, is that you can't disagree with this slide. It's what, of course, right? Is that, yes, we want outcome, not output. I mean, I think you talked about, at some point you mentioned lines of code, or did I just make that up in my head?
Yeah.
I mean, so yeah, no, it is always about the outcome. It is always about the business value. There is absolutely no disagreement on that. And I have been up and down the hierarchy management structure from worker bee to senior VP in companies. And I can tell you, at the highest levels, they spend most of their time talking about value, arguing about value, debating it, pounding on the table, looking for facts and figures to justify it, data, et cetera. So there's nothing in here which is either, in my mind, part of no estimates versus non-no estimates, right?
Sure.
I mean, it's just prudent business.
Yep.
So I just did want to say that there's nothing wrong with it. I'm not criticizing it because it's great, but it's not earth-shattering. It's not new. It's not anything which I think gives us insight into whether estimates are useful or not. So,
yeah, and I think that's maybe one way to put it. In my point is, keep doing these prudent business things, and you can just subtract out the time or story points or relative estimating, and all the things seem to keep working in these contexts that I've done it. So.
In this context, in particular, your particular company that you're speaking of, right? That's where this has worked. And so I am always interested in, from the beginning when I started asking questions about no estimates, I wanted to hear more stories like that. I wanted to hear specifics of domain and whatever. And I guess I would submit that just as before, this is somewhat more specific than I tended to get in answer to questions like that, but it's not very specific, right? Like, I want to hear, examples of, okay, here's how we took this feature that they asked for that we said was too big. Here are the slices we broke it down into. And the answer I usually get from that, oh, well, we can't talk about that because that's proprietary, or that's, and that's fair enough. I've certainly, I'm under the same sorts of constraints. I'm not going to talk about a lot in those specific terms necessarily either, but it's still a problem if you don't have concrete examples, right, of what you're talking about. So that I can say, well, is that really a slice? How did you independently decide that was the most important thing? Was it because somebody who was the hippo, which is the highest paid person's opinion, if you've heard that, or the alpha wolf developer, which is a common thing I've seen in many, many companies, the guy that just seems to know it all and build half the systems and can do anything overnight. And his opinion tends to rule the waves, when it comes down to that.
Yeah.
So I'm interested in concreteness to determine whether it's, how generalizable is this? Because my problem is not with whether any of this is prudent or good, or it's with the universalization of it, if that's a word.
Yeah, I'll give two concrete examples which might help our further discussion. Is it a good time to do that? Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah. So one, we'll just use the generic shopping cart, right? Because that's unrelated to anything I've ever worked on, but analogous. We'll just use that as the domain, but concrete examples from that. Let's say you're shopping, right? So some things are simpler, right? It was like, hey, I want to rename a shopping item, that someone's going to buy, for example, right? And so, you need a page to do that. You need, back-end resources to rename the data, and the user needs a way to go rename it, right? So that's like a smaller example that I think fits very easily into this kind of process because it's already pretty darn small. And then a bigger thing would be like taking a, let's say, old shopping cart app and making it cloud, work in the cloud, right? So something more involved. And maybe I'm giving an estimate. I'll make fun of myself saying it's big.
Yeah.
And
Well,
that, yeah. And then, or selecting your favorite items, right? And so, selecting favorite items could have, oh, I want to associate images with my favorite items. I want them to show up on this page. I want to select them this way. I want to store my favorites locally, or I want them so any account, any device I use it on, my favorites will be remembered. You know what I mean? And so there's all sorts of pieces of that get broken down into, okay, well, what's the most important thing to do first, right? So those are all concrete examples I've done that with. But yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Interesting. Yeah, I'll touch back on that, particularly the rename the shopping cart item example.
Yes.
In a second, because that seemed, yeah, it's suitably small. It might not be as small as one thinks. Never are, right? But yeah. Okay. So why don't we move on? Because I know, yeah, we want to try to get to all of this stuff here. Okay, so here is my major kind of core slide that at least is meant to trigger my discussion on why I think you can just prioritize on value is not a helpful assertion. And so the first thing, and we've touched on this, I've touched on it already in this discussion, is really how do you determine value? How do you determine it at a granular level? I gave the example of, what's the value of a guest bedroom in my house? There gets to be a point where a particular aspect of an overall capability, once you have sliced it into, parts A through Z, what's the value of each of those? And it becomes a matter of who is the loudest, who is the strongest opinionated, maybe who can muster data best to suit their thing, but not always. It depends on the company and the culture, whether data is really predominant in helping make those decisions. But even then, how you present the data, what's forceful, what's not, whether you have a good PowerPoint, or heaven forbid. But so determining what the value is difficult. In fact, one of the things that I listen to, I don't agree with this very often or very much, is there's a video podcast series called Your Daily Scrum. And one of the things they did just a couple of weeks ago was, how do you determine value? How do you measure value? And their answer, absolutely categorical on this, was you can't until you ship. You can't until you ship. There's no way. So everything you do up until then is an opinion or an estimate, is my view. No matter what you think it's based on, you could be dead wrong. When Amazon put out their infamous Fire Phone that they pulled off the market in 3 months, it was just a disaster, and they wrote it off for whatever billions of dollars, right? Drop in the bucket. But still, somebody out there definitely had facts and figures that they had put forward saying this is going to be a success and here's why, right? And so it was an estimate. It was wrong. And estimates, sure enough, surprisingly, shockingly, can be wrong and value ones just as much as anything else. And then, so the other question is, value is this catchword that has been adopted by a lot of the Agile community. You will just prioritize on value. And I submit that we've kind of lost what value actually means, because value is not independent of the level of effort that's required to do something. So if I want you to do it, you can instantly, if I want you to do something, you instantly map it in your mind to how big a deal is that going to be for me? What's it going to cost me in time and effort and risk and whatever. And talking about value as if it were independent of those things. And it's not just cost. It's not just the length of time it will take, but it's other factors, right? That a company always needs to weigh. What's the risk? What's the overall strategy? What's the market pressure? What's the company reputation? What's the regulatory requirements here? And all of those, tend to figure into value more than just this abstract thing of, we can make a mint if we put this out. Well, my quip on this, and everybody's probably tired of hearing it, is that if value were pure and simple and not dependent on other factors, we should all invest in, drop everything else and do time travel, teleportation, and robbing banks. right? Because all of those, man, the money is there. um, and I don't mean to be frivolous about this, but it is a thing where you can't divorce value from cost and other factors. And when I talk about those executives sitting around a table debating value, what they're debating are all the trade-offs that come into play. And so, everyone knows that instinctively, but the Agile community kind of seems to revel in pretending those factors are not important, that you can just categorize things.
Yeah.
The second major thing that I want to focus on is this notion that every feature, and I really shouldn't have written feature here, I should write, a capability, a business capability that they want, can be divisible. Well, of course it can be divisible. We all learned functional decomposition early on as we tried to do programs, right? When we were kids. You want to be able to divide things into, certainly at the task level, to be, make them divisible. But are they divisible in terms of true business value? Can they truly be similar sized? Because a lot depends on that in the approach that you're talking about. If you want to try to ignore level of effort, can they be truly independent of one another, right? If I break down a capability and I have to do parts A, B, and C to really get that capability, well, A, B, and C, maybe I could deliver them separately, but in the end, the user's looking at me going, well, I don't have my capability yet because I don't have all three parts.
Yep.
And then, so that touches on, can a feature slice standing alone provide end user value? And of course, sometimes it can, but my vast experience, almost not exclusive experience, but other than on the mini project level, it does not. It's almost always a raft of things that need to be done together to be able to get the capability truly in the user's hands, and everything else is pretend. Everything else is not actually really there for the end user. Okay, so the concrete counterexamples, I always ask for concrete examples from you, so I'm going to try to give the concrete counterexamples, and people can disagree with these. They have to some degree on Twitter, but for the most part, I've heard very little response to these examples. Twitter. We all are familiar with Twitter. Twitter, for the first part of its existence up until, I don't know, what it was, 4 years ago maybe, was 140 characters limited. And then all of a sudden they went to 280, and it was like, oh, wow, I can now have, I don't have to abbreviate every other word in my tweet and the like. And I was actually, fundamentally opposed to this, and I changed my mind after they put it in because, I found I could express myself so much more clearly, I thought, people can argue, in 280 versus 140. But for them to go to 280 characters per tweet, it was not just a trivial thing. I don't work at Twitter. I have absolutely no knowledge of their back-end systems, but I can just think, you've got clients there, you've got back-end systems, you've got, backup, you've got archiving, all sorts of things that needed to be in place so that those didn't break when all of a sudden you jammed into the pipeline a 280 character tweet. And so releasing that, you don't release 141 and 142 and 143 character capability, right? You have to be able to jump to something bigger. And that is, and yes, it's task divisible, most likely. Is it release divisible? Is it feature end user divisible? I submit not, and maybe I just have a lack of imagination. The only response I ever got back from it on Twitter was, you could roll it out region by region. Well, no, you can't roll it. Yes, maybe you can roll it out region by region, but you still have to have done the entire infrastructure to support it so that in the region you roll it out, you aren't breaking your back-end systems, whether it's metrics or reporting or whatever, to be able to provide that.
Yeah.
Another quick example, and I won't go into great length on this, software that I actually use at home on a little Ubuntu server is Plex. To serve up home videos, basically, in my collection. They wanted to launch a video streaming offering, so yet be, like Netflix and Amazon or whatever, be able to let you get in and stream a movie of your choice. Well, yeah, you can divide that up from a task level, but you can't, if you want to compete against Netflix and Amazon and all the other Hulu and whatever that offer these sorts of offerings, you can't just put it down. Well, we just really support, you can see the thumbnails, but you can't actually click on them yet. Or, you can watch 3 movies, but, and then that's actually content. So that's not relevant. But the whole point being that they had to develop many, many, many features that had to be all in place before they could release.
Mm.
And then just lastly, a company, and this happens to me all the time. I worked in the stock imagery, stock photography industry for a bit, and they were acquiring other companies hand over fist, like another one every couple of months. It was insane. And I was in sort of the back office crew, dealing with the news every time they came through and said, yeah, we acquired this, and for us to be able to monetize this the way we predicted in our public offering, or in our public statements, is that we need to have this integrated in a month so that we can get the revenue, right? And whoa, so in that case, it isn't like you can partially integrate their data source.
Yeah.
Maybe there are elements that you could partially integrate, but in the end, it's either yes, you have it, or no, you don't.
Mm-hmm.
And so, again, task divisible, not necessarily feature by feature, truly deliverable into the end user that way. And so when I'm talking about large capabilities, the questions simply don't go away. Every time you have a large capability, they don't want to care. They don't care. They don't want to hear about, well, first, we have to go into the database and see if they want to hear what is the likely time frame, what's the likely effort, what's our risk that's associated with getting us that capability. Can we do it in this quarter, or should we not do the acquisition at all? Hopefully they ask up front. The company I'm speaking of did not, but that's another matter. Right? Can we do it in a month, right? Is that a smart thing? Otherwise, it doesn't pencil out. We shouldn't do the acquisition.
Yeah.
No. So that's kind of my spiel on the main things here.
Yeah, no, some points I'll grant, and then some points I might challenge, and then we might be running out of time, which means we'll have to pick it up next time. But I do grant that there are many cases in many contexts, and I think in every context I've ever been in, I'm stealing from some other community, but irreducible complexity, right? There's no, like, either legally or usability wise, like, to add the domain concept, but then I can't delete it is like puts us in legal trouble, or it's ridiculous, or you know what I mean? And so, I think that happens quite a bit. You can't feature A has no value unless it has B and C as well, or something like that, right?
Right.
And I do grant there are cases like that, and but I do also grant that there have been cases of the inverse. Well, there's no way that A will have value unless it also has A through F, and then we're like, okay, that's what you think. That's great. We deliver A, and then we ask, do you want to release? And they say, no, of course not. You heard me before. Like, okay, cool. We deliver B. Do you want to release? Oh, wait. Oh, I used it. Yes, we can release. Okay, great. Do you want to work on C next? Yeah. Okay, we work on C. And then they're like, you know what? We don't need E and F, and we don't need the other ones. I'm going to have you work on alpha, something completely, totally unrelated. And so I think, and often things that are hard to slice, it's fascinating when you get smart minds in a room. There are often ways to slice it. And like you said before, I can't speak for Twitter or any of these other examples, but I do know there is a lot of material on slicing that, for example, like, okay, we have mobile, we have desktop, we have web, can we make the change only in mobile, only in the front end, only in the back end, or, all the little pieces, right? And so I've been surprised. I've come into things thinking like, there's no way that this can be sliced, and walking out of it, like, because other smart people in the room, like, wow, we really did slice that, and we are really going to get feedback on that very soon. And often trying things out, so I've heard that before, like, is it even worth it to do this? And we're like, well, do we have budget to try now? Do you want us to, start on it and see what it's like? And then we try for a couple of days, and then we come at it being like, that was super easy, or, whoa, there's a lot of challenges here. And so I guess it's instead of investing in trying to guess the size or estimate the size, you do, and then you learn from doing it. And I recognize that that can't always be done, but I've been surprised in the cases where it has been done. And so I guess to go any further, we'd be jumping into the details of how we would have feature sliced Twitter or something like that. But
yeah, you know, I'd love to have that conversation with anybody, because I don't think that there's a great answer to it personally. But you know, again, I agree with everything that you just said, and that it's absolutely a desirable thing to get a team doing, is how can we make this suitably smaller and deliverable. There is absolutely no argument about that. Yeah. What the problem I have is that the no estimates movement, the assumption seems to be that, and as the statements in fact have been, that don't estimate, slice instead. That, in other words, that every possibly conceivable software development effort can be split into chunks of essentially equal value, and you can deliver those on a daily basis. And I just think that is an illusion about many of the things that I've been involved with, even in recent years. It's just, anyway, so that's just something that I think that you know, it depends on the culture. The culture that you describe, where maybe they haven't truly decided what they really want, you know, that certainly exists. I've been in those. I've been around the cellular industry a lot, and believe me, a lot of that happens in the cellular industry. But they also often need a specific capability, and the capability has to be, if not whole cloth, it has to be the full capability. It can't just be you show thumbnails of something, but they don't do anything yet. It can't be a bank account that you can add to but can't withdraw from. You know, right, in a financial system, you know, that kind of thing. And so there is a collection of functionality that winds up being more than daily implementable, deliverable chunks. So that's kind of my.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I've been on those, and I still find that way of working good, even if the answer is release it, but don't turn it on, or don't release it, because you will learn the truth once it's out there, whether if it's enough or not, for after each piece. But I'll try to hold back on any more, because I think we're at time. But can I
just do my last slide and try to make a point quickly? And this one's a little dicey, you know. And so it's dicey in the sense of, you know, it's not meant to be insulting, but I will tell you that it is the honest reaction that you will get from many business folks when presenting them with overly sliced delivery. By overly sliced, I mean, well, I need my full capability. Stop telling me that you have given me part A, part B, and part C, and I should be happy, you know, etc. They kind of get insulted by this notion of, you know, these two guys are going, you know, one guy says it's done, and the other guy goes, oh, it's great. Oh, but wait, it's not the full thing. And I'll fix that, and then the next day it's done. And there's a lot of self-congratulation that comes, and it's understandable. A team wants to feel like they are delivering and pumping things out, etc. But it's not necessarily meeting the full expectations. And I don't mean that everything has to be defined and perfect and pixel by pixel, you know, to a front specification. That's not what I'm arguing. But I am arguing that overly piecemealing it can be a danger in terms of how a development group is perceived.
Yeah, no, for sure. Yeah, and I think there's been cases where it's been done this way, and that reaction is exactly spot on. And I think there have also been ways where the reaction, it's been sliced and it hasn't been like that. And I guess on that point, I will respectfully disagree, and maybe we'll pick up more next time. But anything you wanted to add for wrap up before we close?
No, other than what you just kind of showed here is that we really are looking for feedback or suggestions, whether that comes in Twitter or wherever you post this in the comments, etc. The perilous YouTube comments, infamous YouTube comments, I guess. But we will be looking for respectful disagreement. You know, we're not interested in name calling. We're not interested in the lower parts of the pyramid here. We're interested in actually addressing the situation, not just stating a disagreement, but providing rationale, you know, with one or the other of us, basically. Yeah. And then I guess, so I don't know if you have anything further to add about that part.
No.
And then our last slide is that we'd like to make this an ongoing thing, assuming that we get, feedback that doesn't say that we're both, not worth listening to or something like that. So here are potential topics that we just brainstormed. There are many, many, many more that we could delve into that we probably disagree on, and respectfully. And so we'll put out a Twitter poll in some form on these, and we're interested in hearing what you folks have to say about what you think we should discuss next.
Fantastic. Yep. And thank you, Peter, for respectfully disagreeing with me. And I learn a lot from this discussion. Each time we have this kind of discussion, and we're looking forward to learning from you all and sharing your perspective with kindness, consideration, respect, and reasons. We love to hear it. And until the next respectful disagreement, have a good one, everybody. See you later.
Thanks.